Hey everyone, welcome back to Dimension Fold, the YouTube and podcast. Today we are pleased to welcome back Jim Willis, one of our favorite authors, and it's been quite a while since we've had Jim on the show. Welcome, Jim.
Good to be with you again, Ken.
Yeah, thanks. How have you been?
Well, pretty good, considering all, I'm not going very far afield these days. I'm staying kind of close to home, but
Yeah,
nothing wrong with that. And thanks to programs like yours and the internet, kind of brings the outside world to me, so I don't have to go out
yeah, that's great. That's
into
awesome.
it for a hermit like myself. That's always a good thing.
Cool. So today we wanted to talk about your new, well, it's not exactly new anymore, but your one of your recent sets of books, which is a
Yeah.
trilogy about the ego.
Hmm.
So this is kind of interesting. Like it's a little bit different from some of the other books you've written.
Yes.
Um, t Tell us how you got interested in this.
Well, watching television and seeing the political situation the way it is nowadays, and then watching what's going on in the my old stomping grounds, which was the evangelical church and preaching in general, the Christian community. Watching what's going on in even in the commercials we get in television nowadays, I began to feel, see the ego run amok. It seems in our culture, it just seems that ego is getting way out of balance. And so I began to think about it. And of course, the more you begin to look for something, the more you find it. And I just seem to find so many cases of narcissism and ego and me too, and all this kind of thing. And I didn't remember it being that bad when I was younger.
Mm,
And it seemed to me that um, ego was taking a bigger and bigger place in today's society. And so rather than just think, well, maybe it's just me, maybe I've just noticed it because I moved out here to the woods and kind of isolated myself, 13 years ago. But it didn't feel that way. So I began to talk to other people on podcasts and authors, and began to have long distance email conversations with people, every from India, from Cornwall, from outside of London to Portugal, Europe. And they began to tell me the same story, that they've noticed it too. And I decided, well, something had to be done about it. So I wrote a book that was supposed to be a standalone book called Little Snow White. And it was a careful study of ego and innocence, the ego of the Wicked Queen and the innocence of Snow White. And I saw how that played out. And so I wrote this book about it, which I thought was a really great book. And nobody was interested in it except for you. And so I thank you. That's why the book is dedicated to you. It's the and it yeah, I saw as soon as I was about halfway through it, I realized this is not a standalone book. It needs it's too big for that. It's too big a topic. And
right.
so it became the third book of a trilogy, uh, based on uh, the individual person versus what I like to call primal unity, what we are now and what we used to be. And that took me to the idea of the loss, or the rise of ego. And it took me into the realm of earth magic versus, or earth energy versus modern energy. And that took me right into the Merlin trilogy. So the first book was born, Merlin the Magician, A Mystery for the Ages. And then when I began to see how we can react to that, I realized that there were other great stories from the past which could tell us how to live in this modern world and how to balance ego. And that took me into the story of Robin Hood. Um, I, I guess probably this whole thing began, if you don't mind just my carrying on and on sometimes,
Yeah,
but
for sure. Yeah.
the the whole thing began with a scheme that I developed to try to understand who we are, where we came from, and what the world was all about. It's been a lifelong quest. I call it the Holy Grail. I've been looking for it my whole life.
Mm.
And 13 years ago, I retired from active ministry, moved out here to the woods, and decided I wanted to experience the
So sorry,
spirituality.
just a question on that. So you
Yeah,
were a minister in
for
an
for
evangelical church?
yeah. Well, I started out as a fundamentalist minister, and then I went to evangelical, and I went through all the things from charismatic to fairly liberal. When I finished, I kept moving toward the left spectrum, the left hand side of the spectrum,
Yeah,
and became fairly liberal by the time I retired. But it was a successful ministry. I had a lot of people and involved in seminars, but the seminars expanded just from Christianity to cover more elements of spirituality. But even still, at the end of 40 years of active ministry, and I wasn't just a musician, a minister, I was also a musician, which took me into quite a different world. And I was a college professor teaching comparative religion at the college level,
mm,
and world religions and all that kind of thing. So, but I was always talking about God, always talking about religion or about spirituality.
right.
And I was never experiencing it to
Mm.
speak of. I mean, I would have moments, like we all do. But I realized when I retired at the age of 62, I left early because I really felt while I was still young enough and strong enough to engage this quest more, I wanted to come out here to the woods and really become a hermit. And that's what I did. I built a house. My wife and I moved out here, 13, almost 14 years ago now. We built a house, and I began to just live in a meditation for years. Learned how to dowse, and dowsing became a big part of my life, still is. And meditation, of course. And it wasn't just that I was meditating every day, I was basically meditating all the time, living in that meditation.
Mm.
And eventually, my prayer was answered. I had said, I want to know God. I want to understand spirituality. I want to feel it. I don't want to just talk about it. I don't want it to become a intellectual exercise.
Mhm.
And lo and behold, that's what happened. I even came out here with a prayer on my lips that came right out of the Old Testament when Jacob was dealing with a difficult time in his life. Just the night before, he was about to reunite with his brother Esau. They had been enemies for a long time now. And when Jacob, whose name was later changed to Israel, Israel means he wrestles with God. And the reason is because the night before, he and Esau were supposed to be reunited, and he was worried and didn't know what was going to happen. He found himself wrestling with this spiritual entity. And the story goes on that it was actually a theophany. He was actually wrestling with God. And
Mm.
as the morning broke and they've been wrestling all night, he said, I will not let you go until you bless me. And lo and behold, that was the prayer that was I came out here to wrestle with God, so to speak.
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
said, I will not let you go until you bless me. And so we really worked at it. It wasn't just I'll try to fit in meditation here or there. I mean, granted, we had a lot of work to do. The woods was just, nothing but woods when we came here. We had to build the road and bring in electricity and, drill the well and do all that kind of stuff. So we were busy, but even while we were working, we were basically meditating. And lo and behold, after a couple of years, I discovered that my prayer was answered. I said, I will not let you go until you bless me. And it happened. It did not come. My experience with the Spirit did not come with the source, I call it now, did not come through Christianity, came through a much more pagan realm. And I guess it probably had to be that way. It couldn't have come through Christianity because Christianity by then was a habit for me my whole life. And I still consider myself a Christian. I love the metaphors of Christianity, but I no longer read the Bible in a literal fashion like I did 50, 60 years ago. It's now become much more of a metaphorical thing. And it's become not the holy book, but one of many, many holy books that are out there in the world. Everything from Hindu Upanishads and even the Book of Mormon and other books that I've just read. I just kind of tried to soak up holy literature. It's
Right.
funny. Yeah,
And a
I
lot
have
of
to.
that literature is really it is all about wrestling with ego and
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I have to tell you that there is a footnote to this story that I've got to share with
Yeah.
your list leaders. A number of years ago, I was asked to go over to Cornwall by a group called Parallel Community. They wanted me to do a workshop with them on the roots of world religions, the common roots of world religions,
Right.
and had a wonderful time with them. But while I was over there was one place I had to say I'd never been to England before, and there's a little town called Fenny Compton up northwest of London that my ancestors, who used to be ministers in the Church of England, where they used to preach. And I went to the little stone church where my great I don't know how many great
Yeah.
grandfathers used to preach, and there was a plaque on the wall with his name, and the historian who met me there and let me into the church took me out back and showed me the mound where his parsonage used to be, or his where he used to live, and they showed me his
Oh yeah.
grave site. And I but when I was in the church, I couldn't resist it. It was the same church that he preached at,
Yeah.
and it's still used as a Church of England, church in the Church of England. So I went up in the pulpit and stood up where my ancestor used to preach, and looking around the church, they had stained glass windows, the same ones that he looked at, and there was
Yeah.
one stained glass window. I couldn't believe it. I looked at it, my hair stood up on end, because it was a scene of Jacob wrestling with God, saying, "I will not let you go until you bless me." He
Huh.
saw that the stained glass window, every Sunday when he went up in that pulpit, and somehow it entered into his DNA, which somehow was passed
Yeah.
down and across the ocean and wound up in me. I couldn't believe it. I don't know where that came from, but I'm sure it was not a coincidence. I'm sure
Huh.
there was something bigger working on the whole thing. But at
That's cool.
any rate, when I came out here and began to live that and have that experience of the source, experience of reality, and of course that led to out of body experiences and all these kinds of things, and that coincided really well with a lot of the people that I've attended at their deathbed when they had near-death experiences, and that's always been kind of hate to say hobby of mine to gather near-death experience stories, but I did, and you put it all together, and I finally came to the point where I had to say, is ego bad or not? And um, there were times in me when I felt that ego was almost, well, in the words of Christianity, a demon that possessed us. We
Mhm.
seem to be so obsessed, and we just can't seem to get rid of it. I noticed when I was trying to meditate. Anybody who's had any experience in meditation knows what it's like to sit there and have your mind just running off crazy directions and everything else. And
Yeah.
it's always, I got to do this, or I do, not me, I.
Right.
And
So
it
can I
all,
can I just
oh
get
yeah, sure,
I'm
sure.
not sure if I really truly understand what ego is. Like I have sort of
Okay,
a hazy definition, and I think probably many listeners will be in the same boat as me, where you hear this
sure.
word thrown around here
Yeah,
and there, and it was kind of a big thing. There was a lot of literature in the psychology and self-help of probably 30 years ago. But I don't know if it's really something that people now are really
yeah.
cognizant of. Like how would you define it?
Let me give you my understanding of it. And again, it's going to be a long story, but
Hmm.
over the years, I in asking the question, how did we get here and who are we really? Um, I came to a definition of ego that I'm happy with. Now, is this going to stand up, in the literature? I don't know, but that's really what the trilogy of, uh, ego, I mean, individual and primal unity is all about. So let me try to give you, as I understand it. Um, I see us all as beginning in what I call the source. um, I don't call it God because the word God has so much baggage with it
Yeah.
nowadays. I can use the word God and someone thinks they know what I'm talking about when I may have a totally different understanding.
Right.
So I try to keep it a little bit mystical, a little bit magical, just the idea of source, the place where we all came from. Can you explain it? No, words don't go there.
Mm-hmm.
The Hindus might talk about Brahma, the one who cannot be explained. If you cannot soil it with words, if you do, you missed it. But source is that place. I like to center it as a wheel of samsara that's spinning around and around. And source is the steady sense, the middle point, the midpoint of that circle, like the old records that used to go around and round. The source is right in the middle, the still point. And source is perfect unity, perfect peace, perfect oneness. And it's I think the place where we come from, except that there's one thing that perfect unity, perfect oneness cannot experience, and that's individuality. Now, if
Mm-hmm.
source is at the beginning, is at the middle of it all, uh, the only way to experience individuality, to experience all that is to leave the source. And so I like to picture us, each one of us, as, let's call it a microcosm of energy, a little pulse of energy that makes what I think is a courageous decision. That's to leave the source and to journey out to the rim of the wheel where it can experience individuality. Now, in order to do that, we have to leave the source and enter the first, let's call it the first dimension. And that's the dimension that I call it consciousness. There's a big debate today. What is consciousness? Does it originate in the mind? Does it spring forth from biology and chemistry, or is source a universal thing and the mind is simply a receptor of it? I tend, in my own mind, I'm happy tending toward the latter part of that. I like to think that consciousness is that first dimension that exists outside the source. Both Stephen Hawking and Albert Einstein call it the mind of God, and they tried to penetrate it with mathematics, which is perfectly legitimate, and some of them come very close. But it's consciousness. We are not yet individuals, but in that dimension of consciousness, we can begin to perceive that individuality exists. But that isn't taken us far enough yet. So we leave that first dimension and go through the first field that we have to pass through. And that's the field that I call the Akashic field, the field of Akasha. It's an old Sanskrit word. And there in the Akashic field is where every potential is realized. The reality of it isn't there yet, but the potential of it is. Socrates explained it. He said, but when he talked about hoarseness and horse is the analogy he used. He said, a horse is not real. It is just a manifestation of what he called hoarseness. Hoarseness is eternal. And there in the Akashic field, the potentiality of a horse exists for the first time. The horse itself isn't there yet, but at least there is a potential of what it can be. And the same thing with humans. Humans don't exist yet in the Akashic field, but the concept of humanness is there, the potential, we'll call it, the probability. And when we go through the Akashic field, we enter into the next dimension. And that's the dimension that is now being called quantum reality. I call it thoughts and intuitions. It's the place where the observer can now begin to exist. Quantum reality is a weird field, but we have discovered it recently. The idea of quantum reality is one of the most proved theories of physics nowadays. But it acts in weird ways. It can be at two places at the same time, or can instantly move from here to there in a quantum jump and communicate, a cosmos apart and communicate instantly.
Yeah.
So from that dimension of quantum reality, now we're starting to take on a little more, let's call it heaviness or shape or something like that. We still have not reached the point where we can be an individual yet. To do that, we have to go through the newly discovered Higgs field. And that's described by scientists as that field where um, our thoughts, our intuitions, our potential takes on mass. When an energy comes through the Higgs field, it's slowed down, so to speak. Here in America, they talk about, they describe the Higgs field as like molasses, it slows down energy. In England, they talk about treacle, whatever that is. I'm not sure
Yeah.
what treacle is, but at any rate, it's that time where energy can take on mass. And when that happens, we find ourselves finally materializing into this material reality manifested. I call it the perception realm. That's where we exist right now. We are energy that has taken on form. And along with that, we can now, for the first time, experience what individuality really is. And that, I think, is the definition of ego. It's the sense of I and thou. I am here, you are there. I am separated from you. In one sense, we are connected because we all come from source. But in another sense, we can, for the first time, experience as individuals rather than as total unity or total oneness, what it is. That, I think, is ego. And so in that sense, when I talk about ego, I used to think that ego was this demon that possessed us. I no longer think that. I think ego is a natural manifestation of individuality. And I would say ego and individuality are almost synonymous, I would think, awfully close anyway.
Yeah,
In other
because
words, yeah, I don't
so
think we can live without an ego. Yeah, yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead.
I
I'm
mean,
sorry.
like in Christianity, there's sort of seems to be this concept or maybe an unwritten or unspoken thing that like that your individual self is not like you're part of a community. You're supposed to
Hmm.
be like living for the betterment of society or
Yeah, the body,
sacrificing yourself.
the
Yeah,
body of Christ, they call it. Yeah, we are all
yeah, yeah,
individuals. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So you've got like selfishness is bad. It's a sin.
Hmm.
Pride is a sin. Like so, there's these things, and I think that that's sort of this. There's this sort of idea that the ego is synonymous with selfish pride and
Yeah,
other
yeah,
things like that.
yeah. I don't accept that anymore. I think ego is totally necessary because you can't be an individual without ego. The problem comes that out here in this material reality manifested in our perception realm, this is a field of duality. And so, along with the good parts of ego, there's also the bad parts. You can have a healthy self-respect, a healthy ego, or
Hmm.
you can enter into the field of narcissism, where it's an unhealthy idea of me first and everything else. And that, I think, is the big spiritual quest to balance off that idea of I am individual. I am ego because I am individual. Ego makes me recognize that I am separate from you. But when that turns into an idea that somehow I am therefore better than you, or
Right.
what you are challenges me, so I'm going to try to eliminate it or anything like that,
Hmm.
that becomes bad. And
Yeah.
so I think the secret that we are trying to find here through spirituality, in which I tried to find it first with Merlin and then with Robin Hood and Little Snow White, was the idea of how do we live with ego in a way that makes it healthy for us? How can we be individuals and still understand our unity, not only with each other, but with everything there is? The Christian story, or the Jewish story, really, and the Muslims accept it too, of the Garden of Eden, I think, is a great metaphor for this. At the beginning of the Garden of Eden, there was perfect unity. Man and woman were one with each other. They were one with the creation. They were one with God
Hmm.
until ego was formed in them, until the temptation came, eat this apple or whatever the fruit was, and you will be as God, that kind of thing. Rather than a part of God, you will be separate from God, but equal with God. So the God will then become you're no longer a part of that source. You're fighting it, so to speak, trying to capture it within yourself. And when that happens, In the Garden of Eden story, the humans are kicked out of the garden. And well, what happens? They have two children, Cain and Abel. And through an obsession of ego, Cain and Abel brought an offering to God, and Cain brought the fruit, I mean, the fruit of his garden, and Abel brought the sheep. And uh, the natural part was, the sheep, the shepherd, the old hunter-gatherer part of the humans, they was destroyed by the brother who had an overactive ego. He was jealous that his way of life wasn't seen, and the first thing he did was to go out and build a city. After he killed his brother, Cain went out and built the first city, and he had the mark of Cain on him. And to me, that seemed to suggest that when ego starts to run amok, and when ego gets an unhealthy idea of itself, when ego turns to narcissism, we turn away from the natural spirituality that nourished the human race for millions of years. And we instead form that idea of, I'm going to build a city, I'm going to start agricultural revolution, I'm going to start getting armies, I'm going to start doing this and that, and it led to right where we are today. That's what begins the trilogy, because I think that's what the story of Merlin is all about. Merlin is the natural spirituality. He's a man of the woods and the forest, and he doesn't do his magic by learning magic tricks. He does it just simply by being Merlin. He's out there and he's that thing. But what happens in the Merlin story? The idea of the dragon energy, for instance, which to me is a metaphor for earth energy and the natural energy from which we spring. What happens is that energy is fought by the city energy that's represented by Arthur in the story. Arthur was born as a natural man, and he was raised by Merlin, but he became a Christian and built Camelot and built the city. And what happens? All of his knights of noble purity, Christian knights of the Round Table, they go off searching for the Holy Grail, which they lost. It's out there in the wilderness someplace. They lost it. And what do? And on their journeys, they slay the dragon. They try to slay the earth energy. And Merlin, in effect, loses the battle at the end of the Arthurian saga. Merlin is he's not killed. You can't get rid of natural spirituality, but he's put down in the crystal cave, and he's imprisoned there in the crystal cave. And I think that's where we are today. We are all imprisoned in our crystal cave. If you want to call it a crystal cave, you can call it a technological cave, or maybe even a technological cage, or whatever it is. But most of us have no real idea of what real earth religion and spirituality is all about. We've lost all that.
Right. And I mean, our leaders have been forcibly trying to kill that dragon, and making the serpent into the enemy that you can't trust this this natural, the natural magic or whatever, and all the witch hunts of the last however many 100 years. And really, it's still, that same energy is still happening today, where
and that's the kind of energy human brain, rather than human wisdom. Human brain builds all this technology, and we are beginning to come to the point right now where we have to say, can we play with these tools that we're inventing? Are we wise enough to play with these all this technological marvelous stuff? It's doing something to us. I've noticed it myself. My attention span is not what it used to be, and it's all because I've spent so much time on the computer and the cell phone and the television and all that kind of stuff. And I see it out there in the public too. People don't want to sit and read books anymore. That means, they want to do something else. So they get their books by listening to them while they're driving, or, taking them along with us. So when they're not doing anything else, then they can maybe read or something like that. And the idea of sitting down, I even found as a musician, as a kid in high school, I used to love coming home from school when I wasn't playing basketball or baseball with the guys or something like that. I'd sit down, I'd turn on a Brahms symphony and listen to it all the way through. And
Yeah.
now I listen to that same symphony and I find myself saying by the third movement, oh man, as soon as this is over, I got to get this done, or I got to do that, or I want to go here. And
Yeah.
that's that technology. That's the dragon, and it's eating us up. That was one of the reasons we had to come out here to the woods to live. I instinctively felt that somehow we had to get away from the hustle and the bustle and all that kind of stuff. And if anybody wants to test that out, anybody listening, I dare you to sit down and just turn off your mind for 5 minutes. I'll bet you can't do it. I'll bet you can't do it for
Yeah.
more than 10 or 15 seconds because there's such a busy world and a noisy world. And Merlin is trapped in his crystal cave. And the technological roundtable knights have taken over. And every once in a while, one of those knights will leave the round table and go out into the wilderness to try to find the Holy Grail. Merlin himself is the Grail. He's down there in that crystal cave, and we've imprisoned him there. And
Okay.
it's tough way to be.
So in your book, you explore that as a concept, and you kind of walk through the original text
Yes,
of the
that's right.
Merlin
Hmm.
legend, I guess.
Yeah,
Um, and then you kind of I guess sort of correlate various scenes or parts of the narrative into various stages of Merlin's journey.
that's right. Right. Yeah, I like to stick right to the text. I used to do biblical exegesis, where you
Yeah,
take biblical verses and try to give them all meaning. Well, I did that with Merlin.
yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, Merlin represents that earth energy. Vortigern represents the modern, oh, technological guy who wants to, and he creates a treaty with the Saxons, invites them over, and after he gets them there, he discovers it's a whole lot easier to invite them over than it is to get rid of them. Once they're in, once they got their foot in the door, they don't want to leave. And
Right.
so Arthur has to rise to the occasion. And I go just verse by verse through the Arthurian stories.
And
And
these stories are would do you think that these stories are historic or uh, allegorical or just fiction or what's your take on that?
probably a little of everything.
Yeah.
I think they're probably all rooted in history. But like any good story, it gets changed and modified and added to. And remember, these things were oral history for a long time before they were written down.
Mm.
By the Middle Ages, when they were finally written down, they had been told around campfires and stuff for years and generations. And so, I think there's probably a historical root. Was Merlin an actual historical figure? Well, probably not, but there might have been a lot of different people that symbolized different parts of his life that were all kind of amalgamated into one. And he became an allegorical figure. And I don't even, I used to worry, did the old timers who wrote the stories, did they understand what they were doing? Would they have understood them in the same way I do? And I used to begin to, stay up at night and think, oh man, probably not. But it doesn't make any difference. I think they were used. They were channels. And when they
Mm.
wrote this stuff down, it becomes great wisdom. And once you start taking a Merlin story and giving every part of the story and every line that is said and everything else, the sword and the stone. I mean, what a wonderful story about, pulling the sword out of the earth itself, and the earth is grasping the stone, and only the one who is pure in heart can pull the stone out and wield it for good. And when he uses it for anything else, it breaks in his hand.
Hmm.
That kind of thing. I mean, it's just such a wonderful, wonderful story. And
Yeah.
even at the end, Merlin is in his crystal cave, but when Arthur is killed basically by his own son, his own illegitimate son, it's a great story of how technology rises up and modern life rises up and gives birth to people who use that technology to destroy their father, to destroy themselves, to destroy the earth. Well, the classic example, for instance, is the atom. You know, we split the atom. Oh boy, what a good boy am I can split the atom. And what is the first thing we did with it?
Yeah.
We became the only country in the history of the world to use an atom bomb against an innocent civilian population. And
Yeah.
we did it in the
Like
name.
Oppenheimer.
Yeah,
Oppenheimer said, "I have become the
I
destroyer of
have become the
worlds."
destroyer of worlds.
Yeah.
And what, what happens? Well, we give a good excuse for it. Well, but it ended the war and saved lives. Well, it probably did, but that's very typical of, I mean, evil always has a good reason for doing what it does.
Yeah.
Uh,
So let's use that as a jumping point to Robin Hood.
good,
So
good. Yeah.
so three separate stories, three separate, I guess, parts of this whole investigation.
Hmm.
So we've talked about Merlin. The next book is about Robin Hood.
Yeah.
How does that fit in? Like, I
Well,
think we all know the Robin Hood story. He robs from the rich and steals from the rich and gives to the poor.
yeah, yeah.
So it's a bit of
Well,
a redemption story, I
it
guess.
it occurred to me that, like it or not, Merlin is in his crystal cave. We've imprisoned the earth religion, and we live now in a world that's been conquered by technology. We live in a world that's been conquered by narcissism. So how do you live in it? And when I looked at the story of Robin Hood, I realized you can't live in it alone. Robin Hood was born of as a nobleman. He was born out there in the world of civilization, but he was forced out to go back and live in the woods. He could live in the woods by himself and be a hermit, but he didn't do that. He gathered around himself a group of like-minded individuals. He realized he couldn't live in the world by himself. He couldn't live in
Mhm.
the civilized world by himself. And so he gathered his group of merry men. And everybody from Maid Marian to Little John to Will Scarlet, every one of those guys that lived out in the woods with Robin Hood had a different um, talent, a different craft, a different skill set that enabled them to live together and defy the civilization, the narcissistic civilization that pressed in on them from all sides. And I think that's what we have to do. I don't think any one of us, no man is an island, no man stands alone. Each man's joy is joy to me, as the poet said. And I think each one of us, we have to surround ourselves with a group of like-minded people who see what's going on, and each one of us brings a different talent to that group, a different
Mhm.
ability. Little John brought allegiance and strength. Will Scarlet brought the gift of music and arts. Mitch the Miller's son, he was a man of the earth, and he brought the idea to work with your Maid Marian brought her own bunch of skills, and all of them together formed a community which was able to defy the narcissistic civilization that was symbolized by Prince John and the Sheriff of Nottingham. They were all about me, me, me. Robin Hood was about us.
Mhm.
And at the very end, each one of these stories, by the way, Merlin the Magician, Robin Hood, and Little Snow White, each one of them, at the very end, after the battle is won, royalty comes from on high, a symbol of God welcoming us all, so to speak, when we fight the good fight. Because we came out here to this outer edge for a reason. We are living in our perception realm, our material reality manifested, I think, for a reason. And if we can join together and actually accomplish something, uh, narcissism doesn't have to be the end product of ego. It could just as easily be love and compassion and all the other good things that ego can bring. So I think that's where Robin Hood, to me, it's so important because he shows us how to live in this world that has been conquered by a narcissistic civilization.
Mhm. Interesting.
Yeah.
And it really comes down to community.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. Well, which is exactly what what you're doing on your podcast. You have a community out there. You talk to each other. You talk to different people. You get different
Yeah.
points of view. People are listening right now and
Right.
realizing that we are all part of the merry men. We're Ken's merry men, and we're out here. And the question is, what talents or what crafts can I bring to it?
Yeah.
Maybe
Well,
I can write books or poetry or do music or
yeah, that's
help the
exactly it.
poor,
And
something like that.
I
Yeah.
was just I did a recording yesterday with Tyrone Ellington from Rebirth of the Word, and he's got a podcast and a website, and he's going to be writing a book as well. And so it's that same kind of thing where, like, on his channel is very discussion oriented. Like, he wants to
Hmm.
have these open discussions, and so he's got his Facebook page, and his followers
Sure.
it's very interactive. And I
Hmm.
think that's, maybe that's not quite, like, I'm not quite as good at that part of it, but that's the thing, is
Yeah.
we're doing the same thing in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
And you're right, that is really important.
Yeah. If we want to see how dangerous it is to not have that, all we have to do is look at American politics.
Mm,
And I'm 76 years old, and I've never seen America this divided. And it's all because there is not that sense of community anymore, where we can come with different opinions and each bring our own talents. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the days when Ronald Reagan, the arch conservative, could sit down in the office with Tip O'Neill, the flaming liberal, and they could just sit there and share a pint together and tell Irish stories back and forth. I mean, they were friends, they talked to
yeah,
each other.
yeah,
Totally different politics, different sides of the aisle, but they could work together to get something accomplished.
right.
Um, we've lost that. We've lost it. We are just about as divided as we come. And if we don't find some kind of a way to form a community that can talk, even though people may have differing opinions about this or that. And we see the same thing in the church. The church is divided right now, like I've never seen the church divided.
Yeah,
And it's our way and your way, and we're
right,
different, and there's
right.
no sense of
So
community.
do you, like, to me, like, when I think about why, like, what drives that scenario, like, there's a lot of different things that you can think about. I mean, there's different ideals and different assumptions and
Yeah.
different opinions, but then you also have stuff like, well, there's hatred, there's
Yeah.
bitterness, there's
Ego,
pain, there's the
ego,
fear. Yeah,
narcissism.
that's all,
Yeah.
and that's all ego, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. It all
Like,
is. It's all tied up in the ego, the rise of ego. I think it's killing us. I
yeah,
really do. And that's why I think this trilogy is so important. I hope people will read it because I think it's just so important because it not only does it explain the problem in Merlin the Magician, but it explains how to live in that world in Robin Hood. And of course, that leads us to the third book, Little Snow White, which is the idea of ego and recapturing of innocence, which is a totally different story.
that's
Um,
where we need to go next, I guess.
yeah, Little Snow White is just a fascinating story. It's the biggest book of the three, and I couldn't help but think of the Wicked Queen when I discovered I came out here to the woods to get away from it all this kind of stuff. And as soon as I started writing books, and as soon as I, opened up, my daughter moved in next door to handle the business part of JW2 Productions and
Yeah,
with the technology, and she put up a YouTube page, and we started doing YouTubes, and she, did the Facebook thing, and which was all wonderful stuff because that's how you communicate. My problem was that every morning I'd turn on the computer. Oh man, how many people looked at my Facebook post last night? How many people responded to my YouTube page? How many people responded to the last interview? And I found myself just like the Wicked Queen, looking in the mirror, saying, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" Except I
oh
was
yeah,
saying, "Computer, computer on the desk, who's better than all the rest?"
yeah, yeah,
And my own ego responded to that. If I had a big response to a YouTube video, I was successful. I was great. If I didn't have a good response to it, oh man, I'd be in the dumps. And I thought, there you go. You can't even get away with it out here. I'm like
yeah.
the wicked queen looking in the mirror. Who's the fairest of them all? And that kind of led me to Little Snow White. And of course, the symbolism in Snow White is really rich. It's a very deep-seated symbolism. Um, I think, in a way, if anybody who's listening to this has only seen the Walt Disney movie, Snow White, you really haven't seen Snow White. Walt Disney did us a great injustice, because at the end, when the wicked queen tries over and over again to destroy the the one who is challenging her ego the most,
Hmm.
and she finally does, and it's very symbolic of the Bible, that Snow White eats the apple just like Eve ate the apple. And Snow White falls into this deep sleep that looks like death. And so there is innocence killed, innocence destroyed. And what do we do with innocence? Well, the working men, the dwarves, built her this elegant casket of glass and everything else, where it was just beautiful. So they take death and put it in a beautiful coffin. It's just like Jesus said in the New Testament. He said, you Pharisees, you people who are all full of religion, you're just like whitewashed tombs, full of
Right.
dead men's bones, And so that we've enshrined innocence, but it's still dead. And in the Walt Disney movie, Snow White is brought back to life when the prince comes and kisses her. Well, that wasn't in the original Snow White story at all. In the
Mm.
original story, she's being transferred, and what happens was one of the dwarves, they stumble, and the casket comes into contact with the earth energy, and
Oh,
then Snow White is reborn. And so, in other words, Snow White shows us the way out. We have to, instead of simply enshrining spirituality in a casket like religion,
yeah.
and enshrining it in a beautiful glass box and worshiping it every Sunday and saying, "Oh, look, there is innocence. That's beautiful," and everything else. Instead of that, we have to recapture by bringing that innocence back to life again. How do we do that? By bringing it back into contact with the original dragon energy, the original earth energy. Then the circle comes full round, and Snow White is restored. And then in the original Snow White story, the prince comes from outside, but they conquered it themselves. But I'm sure even in our own time, we've taken spirituality, real spirituality, the earth energy that we were talking about earlier, and I think we've dressed it up in religious protocols and religious ceremonies, and we've enshrined it, but basically it's dead.
Hmm.
At least it's sleeping very sound. And how do we bring that original innocence back? How do we restore the earth energy? We bring it back in touch with that which it found in the first place. And that's what destroyed the evil queen. I think that's what we need right now. We don't need more religion. We need more spirituality.
Right.
And we need to let spirituality explode. A religion just is a casket around spirituality. It keeps it bound up with rules
Right.
and
Right.
dogmas and doctrines and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. We
Now
we talk about morals, but we
yeah,
don't
yeah,
embody them, and we
yeah,
find, that's why you have all this stuff with priests involved in sex scandals and all this
yeah,
stuff,
yep,
because it's not a reality. It's
yeah.
that's the whitewashed tomb, like you said.
Exactly. And it's everywhere. When the Catholics were having the huge trouble when the whole idea of the priest and the altar boys, and the priest and the sexual molestation came out. Oh, there was
Mm.
nobody calling out and chortling more than the Baptists, and they were saying, "Yeah, that'll teach them, boy. That Catholicism and all their immorality." So now, what do we have in the Southern Baptist Convention Church going on right now? Same thing. It was just
Exact
covered
same
up. We
thing.
just discovered it something at a different time.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of saying, I can only become better if I make you worse, or I
Right.
can only be found satisfaction if I deny you satisfaction or something like that. That's a terrible thing. And I think
Yeah.
we need to develop a whole new spirituality that encompasses an idea of community and old earth energy, bring it back. Instead, we've made a sin out of it, oh, the pagans, that kind of thing. That's a terrible thing, a terrible thing. I'm just ashamed of the community that I was a part of for so long in so many ways. I really am.
Hmm.
I had a
Yeah.
I had a situation the other day. I was in touch with a former parishioner of mine who is out in Texas, and he's very much involved in an evangelical church out in Texas. And he said, we have a men's group at our church. And I said, well, we had men's groups when you were back with my church too. He said, no, this is a different kind of men's group. Big, a lot of men get involved in. I said, oh, well, is it a prayer group? Well, we do pray, but what we do is every Wednesday night, we meet out at the shooting range. And we practice, we meet together and have a prayer at the beginning, and then we practice shooting. And then after we've done target practicing all night, we come back and we have a business meeting telling us where everybody is going to sit next Sunday in church, so we can have the whole church surrounded, and we're all going to have guns, so that if anybody comes in to try to steal the offering plate, or if anybody tries to shoot up the church, by golly, we'll have them surrounded. And all I can
Wow.
say was, come on,
Jeez.
what has happened? And I said, is this common? He said, oh yeah, well, a lot of churches have it. Well, recently, just last Sunday, as a matter of fact, I was at a podcast with some old college friends of mine. We get together once a month on Zoom,
Yeah.
and two of them are involved in the Jewish community. One down in Dallas, and one up in Canada. And I told this story, and they were saying, well, yeah, they all have safeguards built into their Jewish families, their Jewish communities, their congregations. And the head of the one community down in Dallas actually has a panic button that's on his wrist, and if he pushes it for 3 seconds or more, boy, the SWAT teams come running, because Jewish community has seen a lot of persecution and people shooting up synagogues and all this kind of thing. And I said, is this common then? It's not just a Christian thing, it's in the Jewish community too. And both of them, from the United States and from Canada, they said the same thing. Yeah, you can't have any kind of a decent sized congregation without having safeguards built in to bring the police in if you need to. And I'm
Wow.
thinking, what has happened to us?
Yeah. Yeah. There's something seriously messed up here.
Seriously wrong.
Um, okay. So maybe let's take a couple more minutes and maybe just give us some kind of closing comments or something. And after I hit stop on the record button, I want to talk to you about maybe another idea for later, but it's going to take too long. So in closing, I'm going to put up the books here. These
Okay.
are so here's Jim's 3 books um, on the Ego trilogy here, and please check them out. They're on Amazon, and you can also get them through our website, dimensionfold.com. And yeah, Jim, let's just give us a bit of a brief wrap up here. And
Sure.
in closing, what would you want to tell us?
Well, it's easy to get negative. I think probably if I listen to this talk, I'm going to discover that I probably come across as sounding pretty negative. I don't think it has to be that way. I think, yes, we are at a turning point, a precipice. Let's call it a fork in the road, and maybe we've even gone down the wrong fork a little bit. But I don't think it's too late to turn around and come back and to start on a new tact. And what it's going to take is a group of us who, maybe even without fully understanding all of the dimensions of this, it's going to take a group of us who have to say, just because things look pretty bleak right now doesn't mean it has to be this way. It's always darkest before the dawn. And I think humankind, the human civilization, our civilization, is really at a crossroads right now. We have to decide. You and I have talked about ancient civilizations before over the last few years, and
Yeah.
we've talked about the possibilities of perhaps other civilizations back in Earth's history, maybe even non-human civilizations, but uh, uh, or at least as we would understand it, maybe they came to this same point. Um, Maybe they despoiled their atmosphere or their ecology just like we're doing. Maybe
Right.
they came to the brink of atomic war, or as in the case of Ukraine right now, the possibilities of atomic, you know, uh, the whole nuclear plant there that's being shelled even as we speak.
Mm.
Maybe they came to that point. Maybe they came to an ecological or I mean an economic crisis that destroyed them. Maybe they came to a breakdown of morality, and maybe they disappeared. Um, but that doesn't mean that it has to end. Let me close with the words of Plato when he was talking about Atlantis and whether you believe in Atlantis as a real thing or a metaphor at this point. We don't have to argue that, but let's use it as a metaphor, whether or not it really existed. He said, for many generations, the people of Atlantis obeyed the laws and loved the divine to which they were akin. They all came from the source. He said the
Mm.
same thing that we began with. They reckoned, he said, that qualities of character were far more important than their present prosperity. Wow, do we need to hear that in the Americas now? Character is more important than prosperity. So they bore the burden of their wealth and possessions lightly and did not let their high standard of living intoxicate them or make them lose their self-control. But, he went on to say, when the divine element in them became weakened, when the divine element in them became weakened, and their human traits became predominant, when ego began to dominate, they ceased to be able to carry their prosperity with moderation, and they were destroyed in a single day and night.
Mm.
I think that describes our situation today as well as anything, probably. Uh, I think the divine element, the source from which we came, has become weakened in a lot of ways through our civilization. And our human traits are becoming predominant. Narcissism, ego run amok. When that happens, no matter how prosperous they are, we seek more. More is never enough. We have to have more, and we cease to carry our prosperity with moderation. So I think it's possible. It doesn't have to happen, and it's up to us to make sure it doesn't. Now, how to do that? Well, I guess we start by talking about it, just like you and I are right now,
Hmm.
and all
Yeah.
the people who are listening. We're all in this together. What can we all do in our own little sphere of influence?
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, we got to understand that there's a problem before we can work towards a
Yeah,
solution. And
absolutely.
I think
I was
that's
going to say
what
that's why shows like yours are so important because they identify the problem.
yeah. Well, and I think that's really what you're doing in these three books. So yeah, anyone who's listening, really, if this is, even though these books are sort of philosophical in a way, they're also kind of self-help books. Um, and they really, I think reading these three books is going to help you to understand the problem
Yeah,
and see the solution
yeah,
forward
sure.
in your own life.
And to continue the conversation for anybody who's listening, I love to, I mean, Ken and I can talk like this. We have no idea who's out there. So if anybody's listening and wants to continue the conversation, go to my website, jimwillis.net. There's a contact page there. You can email me and we can enter into a discussion about it. And I look forward to hearing from you. I really do.
That's awesome. Okay, thanks a lot, Jim, for joining us today, and we will certainly talk to you again sometime. And but for now, we'll say goodbye, and thanks to all of you listeners for joining us. And please do subscribe; it does help. Thanks a lot.